that took place on India post the geographical discovery, when somebody found out that there is a route to India by sea, and India was one of the most flourishing business hubs of the world at that time. And we had foreign invaders starting to come to India, and they started desiring more than business. They started desiring for land and women in India. So, somewhere or the other, maybe that is the origin wherein the parents or the husbands of these women were like, cover your face, do not come out of the house, because I have no surety that we'll be able to protect you. So nextly, the Varna system, yes, it gravely, most certainly has affected gender inequality in India, because according to the Varna system, a girl of a certain class of the society is not supposed to get married to another caste person. And if she does so, she's considered outcasted from her own family. And that is where I guess the parents started withdrawing their involvement in their married daughter's life, which we all know is very important, that the parents keep in touch with their married daughter. They understand, they give her time to express her feelings, because Kanyadan doesn't mean that you donate a cow and whether the person wants to graze it or milk it, it's his choice, right? So that is where parents started withdrawing their involvement in their married daughter's life based on Varna system. Nextly, the underwhelming aspects of literature of the later Vedic age, and even Manusmriti to some extent. Maybe we are sheer mortals who cannot understand what this legendary man meant when he said that yes, a woman has to be protected by a man in all walks of her life. Maybe we have understood it in its plain reading, and there's something more philosophical to it, which we as the current society are failing to understand, because that is one underwhelming aspect wherein we started treating women as secondary or tributaries to a family rather than being the face of a family. So those were certain things. Next, of course, is sati system. And I've mentioned the word euthanasia here is because I read this very beautiful story of Satyavan and Savitri, wherein Satyavan, the husband, is being taken away by the god of uh, death, Yama, and Savitri decides, no, who is he to take my husband? I'll go behind my husband and get him back to the mortal world. So that was something like a woman willingly wanted to, sacrifice herself along with her dead husband. And that concept somewhere, when the time came to the later Vedic age, right? It started growing in a way where the lady was forced to do it. There are scenarios wherein the girl was as old as 8 and her husband was as old as 80, and he died of ill health, and the 8-year-old girl's head was shaved. She was made to wrap up in a red or white sari and sit on her husband's burning corpse. So nextly, the concept of dowry system. Earlier days, parents used to gift their daughter with lot of jewelry, things to use on a household basis, thinking that she's starting her new life. Once this whole concept started getting misunderstood, we can see that parents started promising the groom's family, saying that yes, we'll give you so much of wealth, so you please take care of our daughter. Because referring to my previous points, the girls had lost the right to education. They did not know the outside world. So, somewhere or the other, they had to purchase a groom for their daughter so that he takes care of her just the way they were taking care of her. And this again started this whole concept, the institute of demanding dowry. The groom would say, I have so and so merits, I studied from so and so school, I have so and so job, so I am worth at least this amount of money. So that, according to me, might have been the origin of the sati system. Kritika, can we have the next slide, please? Okay. So now we come to the British era, right? This was the time wherein we as a culture, we as a society had lot of exposure to the Western world. That somewhere is an underwhelming aspect also, and is also an uplifting aspect. I call it an uplifting aspect because had it not been the British invasion, had it not been people like had it not been organizations like the Arya Samaj and Brahma Samaj, we wouldn't have known that we as a civilization had lacunas, because we considered things like child marriage, dowry, sati, outcasting of women who were widowed, and all these things we had somewhere started to inculcate it in our daily life and thought it was normal. So had it not been the exposure to the Western education, we wouldn't have understood that uh, we are trying to misunderstand our own cultures. So we have the ban on child marriage and sati from the Child Marriage Restriction Act 1929. We have the Indian Succession Act of 1925, and I'm astonished, why did women not have any rights to property before that, and why did we need an enactment to declare our right on property? And you see that in the 1925 Act, women are not given the right to property per se, to hold their property. They are just made the guardians of the property until their minor child, basically their minor son, cannot inherit the property. When the child turns major, the property has slipped away from the wife's or the widow's hand. And this again is astonishing because we are the people who coined the term Stridan in the early Vedic age, and we said whatever a woman owns is her own. And we had forgotten our own concepts. So, yeah, in the 1956 Act, finally, they started recognizing the wife as an individual separate from her husband and could have rights to property. She was later on given under the Hindu Succession Act, the status of a class 1 heir. But then this is up until 2005, the journey of a Hindu woman. What about the journey of a Muslim woman in India? So, a Mohammedan woman, up until very recently, did not have the right to say no to a divorce. And if you take instances such as Shabanu case, Shabanu was a senior citizen when her husband divorced her, when talaq was pronounced to her. And she, at that age, where would she go for her own maintenance? And it is really alarming that it was somewhere in the 80s that we thought, yes, a woman is not being given maintenance from her ex-husband. We should have done this long back. However, better late than never, we can say. And from Shabanu case, we understood one thing: women of any caste, section, creed, anything it may be, there is a victim of uh, abuse within marriage in any kind of category of women you take up. A woman might be a very well educated engineer owning a posh apartment in Bangalore, and she might still be undergoing domestic violence. She might still be threatened for dowry, and we wouldn't know. Only until and unless the women come out and they make a noise, they knock the doors of the court, we wouldn't know. And fortunately for Shabanu, with the amount of legal help that she got, we understand that she could claim maintenance. And here we must understand also the nexus between the personal laws, the religious laws or the personal laws, and uh, the whole idea on which India as a nation, the legal system of India is standing. So when we say the right to equality and equity is given to everybody, then we must understand that somewhere we'll have to alter our old technical religious beliefs. I am not saying, let's say no to religion per se. I'm just saying let's alter our religious practices in order to maintain that balance between wrongs and rights, between morals and something being immoral. So when we speak about Shabanu case, we should also speak about talaq, because that was the root cause that this case upon maintenance took place, right? So talaq again has many varieties. We are not bothered about the varieties of talaq which have provided certain breathing time or equal rights to women. We are bothered about this one particular kind of talaq, talaqul biddat, which can be pronounced at any point of time, however possible. There need not be witnesses, and the wife does not have the right to somewhere rebut to that pronouncement of talaq. This is what caused such a hue and cry from the past 1 decade that we are seeing. And finally, we as Indians, we should be happy that we have come out of it. And the concept of triple talaq is just pronouncement of uh, the term talaq by saying that I consider the God as witness, the Almighty as witness, and I refuse to consider you my wife. That is basically it, and that is triple talaq for you. So right now, the courts have declared it void. We have accepted it to be void. The next question is, are triple talaq cases being reported in Indian courts right now? Are women coming out and saying that they have been abandoned under the banner of talaqul biddat, so that uh, the court can assist, the judiciary per se can assist the executive in coming up with stringent measures, more punishments, stricter punishments to avoid the pronouncement of talaqul biddat at any point of time. So now that we are talking about the courts and their role in maintaining equity, we should also understand that in 1984, due to the enactment of the Family Courts Act, this is something wherein the women of India took a deep breath, saying that, hey, there is a place where we can go and ask for something which has been denied. The people in India per se could go to a place, a safe place, wherein they wouldn't be judged, and wherein the only idea would be upholding justice, and they could express their views. So, a very funny anecdote that I'd like to share with y'all when we're talking about the family courts. Way back in 2016, I was interning under a sitting judge in the family court. So, it so happened that a 19-year-old girl, alongside her 1-year-old child, had filed for divorce against her 23, 24-year-old husband. Now, the situation was so that the husband was a rickshaw driver, and this 19-year-old girl came from an affluent family. The husband was the person who used to drive her rickshaw to her school or college, and that is where the two have met and decided to elope. They get married, and then this girl who's currently 19, probably 18 at the time she got married, that is when the girl starts realizing, oh my god, my parents had given me a life of luxury. And she, in her complaints against her husband, states that she wants a divorce because she cannot raise a child in a one bedroom house. She wants a divorce because her husband is a rickshaw driver. This again, I will speak in detail when we talk about the misuses of Section 498A of the IPC. But yes, so such a vague of a reason, a lady can come to court. And this is a good thing, because if a person can come with a very vague, very non-considerable reason to court, that means that we have achieved the level of uh, legal accessibility wherein any women under threat or men under threat can also come before the family court. And as we all know, family court functions a little bit differently. Family court has the right to advise for counseling. Family court also has the right to conduct in camera proceedings when as and when it is available. And yes, so now let us talk about the Hindu Marriage Act. Section 11 of the Hindu Marriage Act has banned polygamy. It has declared polygamy void. Now, mind you, Section 11 does not speak about polyandry. It only speaks about polygamy. And if a person, uh, a woman suspects that her husband is also married to somebody else without her knowledge, and if that woman is a Hindu and basically a person who doesn't follow Mohammedan faith, then she has all the rights to approach the family court, either for a judicial separation or for a divorce, and can claim permanent alimony, one time alimony, or can claim maintenance for herself and her minor child if the court at all decides to give the child to the mother. Nextly, Section 13, Subclause 2 of the Hindu Marriage Act. Yes, of course, this is very important, because this is yet again certain special circumstances wherein the wife alone has the right to ask for divorce. And these circumstances are not available for the husband. And these special circumstances, as we know, also involves adultery, hiding of material information about the person's faith, of the person's profession, or the person's mental or physical health condition, and such other things. Kritika, can we have the next slide, please? Okay. So now we shall talk about Section 24 and 25 of the Hindu Marriage Act, the maintenance to the spouse who has the lesser income or has no income at the point of time of divorce. So now a question may arise: is a spouse eligible for maintenance if he is a husband? Of course, he is eligible for maintenance provided he has all legal proof that his current wife earns more than him, or he has all legal proof that he is unable to maintain for himself. Yet again, one anecdote that I saw at my time in the family court as an intern is that there are husbands who approach the court saying that currently I'm in between jobs, and uh, I do not have the financial condition to support myself, and my wife is in employment, or she has a business of her own, and she's earning enough to provide allowance to me. Now, again, another question that we'll have to keep in mind is: has the wife come to court against this man under special circumstances under Section 13, Clause 2? Has this wife alleged this man of not being responsible? Has the wife alleged this man of alcohol or drug abuse? So all these things have to be considered by the court before the court gives its decision about the maintenance to the husband. And likewise, now while we are talking about maintenance, we must also understand that majority of the times the court always feels a soft corner towards the women. The court always allows the requests of a woman. This is yet again because of the existence of the feminist movement. This is yet again because of a preconceived notion that the woman is always the victim. Yes, majority of the times women are the victims, but when we talk about the misuse of Section 498A, we also understand that there are women in India who just take advantage of the lenience the law has given them. So maintenance, and when there is an issue out of the wedlock, when there is a child, they always consider it better that the mother has the child. This again is a topic of debate, because the man can also allege his wife of substance or alcohol abuse. He can also allege his wife of domestic violence, or causing mental trauma to him. Now the question arises: if all these allegations on the wife is proven, then how best it is to send a child along with her? The person who has been proven guilty of uh, such offenses, will she be able to maintain a child? And wouldn't it be best that the father gains the custody of the child in such circumstances? And this is also because of a preconceived notion that yes, after divorce the man can get married again, maybe the woman won't. This again is a preconceived notion, because we say maybe. There are chances that the man remains unmarried and the woman gets married. And when we as Indian citizens, we think that yes, the stepmother is always the villain in the child's growth years. How far is the stepfather okay or not okay? Because the court will have to see that if the child is in custody of its mother, and the mother has chosen to remarry, has she spoken to her new spouse about the child? Is that person okay with taking up the responsibility of the child? And is he okay if the father of the child is still involved in the child's life? We see that there are two kinds of fathers. The ones who follow up on the court's order and they fight for their right to meet their child, at least may it be once a month or may it be twice a month, whatever the counseling and whatever the mutual understanding between the parties is occurred to. They fight for their rights and they shower the child with gifts and they shower the child with toys so that the child feels that yes, although my parents are separated, I still have a father and a mother. Wherein there are situations wherein the father doesn't follow up on the court appointed designated time to meet the child. Then again, there are fathers who just exist on checks, who exist on signatures. There are all these kinds of various situations that the court will have to take into consideration. Likewise, if at all the court is deciding that yes, the child has to stay with the mother, stay with the father, sorry, then again, does the mother want complete involvement in the life of the child? Because there was this documentary that I was seeing wherein the mother had been physically abused and sexually abused, and out of this sexual abuse, she beget a child, and whenever she sees the child, she only feels like it is the result of an offense, that is proof of her being a victim. So she did not want to be much involved in the life of the child, and that's okay, right? As long as the parties, the couple have come to a proper understanding as to who should be involved in the child's life, to what extent, right? So having spoken about maintenance, now let us dwell a little bit upon dowry. The concept of dowry, like I told you, started as a gift giving process, later on took a very evil turn, we could say. So according to the Hindu Marriage Act and also according to the IPC, if a lady dies under unnatural circumstances within 7 years of her marriage, there is always a presumption that it could be a dowry death. Please mind you, I say it could be a dowry death because, like again, there is a nexus between all these, changes in the light of gender equality that we speak, and uh, the Article 21. Now, somebody could say that I hit my spouse. I hit my spouse in my house, so that should not be a problem to anybody, because what happens inside my house, the house I pay rent or tax for, is within the ambit of my right to privacy. It's within the ambit of my Article 21. So somewhere this is also socially accepted that if there are marital problems and somebody is suffering due to marital problems, it is best that we do not interfere. Of course, we as Indians, we have this typical mentality of gossiping. When we are in social circles and gatherings, we do say that yes, I am aware that her husband hits her daily for dowry, but then I am not going to take any action against it because it is their family issue and I am nobody to interfere in that. that mentality we Indians have, and we are failing to understand that it does not remain a family issue when the demands are so visible. When the demands are out there, everybody knows that there is a demand for dowry, and the lady is being harassed mentally or physically by her in-laws or her husband. In this regard, it doesn't remain something personal to that family, it becomes public, because the IPC states that dowry demands are crime, and crime is something which is not a civil wrong, it's the wrong against the society. So if Mr. X has asked Mrs. X for, let's say, a bike or a refrigerator or a house, that means all the Mr. X's in India might go ahead and ask all the Mrs. X's in India to do the same. The line between the civil wrong and the societal wrong, the criminal wrong, has been crossed when the very demand for a gift arises. And we should understand that. And when we, as neighbors, friends, relatives, or passers by, if we are aware that there is a demand for dowry from the groom's family, then we must understand that it's crime, it's criminal, and we must raise our voices against that. And having said this, there are a lot of institutes working for the to resolve marital issues. And one such organization is the Lok Adalat, wherein the parties are free to express themselves. You have the Gram Panchayats, and Gram Panchayats, mind you, are organizations which have been in existence even before these courts that were established during the British era have come into existence. And Gram Panchayats in certain places till date in India have better understanding of the people around them than the courts. And it is obviously a possible way wherein the elections to the Gram Panchayat are conducted keeping all these things in mind, so that the Gram Panchayat is filled with people who speak for justice. And when that happens, may it be any small issue like the anecdote that I gave you of the girl, the 19-year-old girl with her 1-year-old child, may it be something as silly as that, or may it be something as alarming as dowry, or as alarming as a dowry death. The Gram Panchayats play a key role, provided they perform their activities to the fullest. We have so many organizations for women, for we have homes and shelters for women who have undergone physical violence or mental violence. We have organizations providing for them, providing education, providing employment and things like that. So these organizations do exist and they're ready to lend a helping hand. But where are we as a society to accept that? Where are we as a society to refer a lady to such organizations? Because there is this very open concept that uh, exists in the Western countries called self-help groups, wherein people just join hands, the victims of the same kind of situations, they join hands and they make sure that they reach out to another fellow victim. So where are we as a society trying? Because everything is written and picture perfect on ink and paper. Are we implementing it? Are we making use of it? Is the question that we'll have to answer. I think I covered this point about the assumption of the mother being the better parent than the father. Nextly, yes, of course, we'll have to dwell upon the offenses that takes place against men, because, like I mentioned earlier, we're talking about equity and not just speaking gender sensitivity. So there, and I vouch for it that there are men in India who undergo sexual abuse. I vouch for the fact that yes, men in India do undergo mental harassment from their wives. There are situations in India wherein the wife has approached the court of law under section 498A, has gotten her fair share of the property, has divorced her husband, and the husband did not ever commit any such offenses that she alleged on him. And there are situations wherein the family is unnecessarily pulled into all this, the complications. Let us say the wife does not wish to live with her husband, and she knows that the husband is financially very stable. She knows the fact that he is very influential in the society. He has a certain status to maintain in the society, and somewhere in the corner of her mind, she carries this idea of revenge, wherein she just wants to allege the husband of something he has not committed to. And we have seen these instances wherein the whole social status, the way the society used to look at the man changed because he was alleged under section 498A. And it is but alarming that all these 498A cases, right, they are taken up as a very serious matter when it comes to the victim who's going against her husband. And there is very little time, or there is very little hearing given to the husband. the, I don't know, this might just be my personal view, but as far as we as a nation have seen, like there are a lot of organizations which have come forward saying that there are men who are identified as victims of section 498A. And this again is alarming because section 498A is not an offense, it is a protection against an offense. So if somebody has come forward and identified themselves as the victim uh, of a law that exists to protect somebody from crime, where are we as society going? We all have heard this very wonderful saying during the 2013 amendments to the criminal law, saying that do not tell your daughter not to be sexually harassed, tell your son not to sexually harass. Likewise, do not tell your son not to demand for dowry or not to abuse his wife. Also tell his wife, or also tell the daughter not to misuse laws which are made for her protection, because a defense cannot be used as an offense to achieve illegal gains. That is where we have shattered the whole concept of natural law, and we as a society uh, should not or must not go to that extent. Kritika, can we have the next slide please? Okay. So nextly, we, like I said, everything is very well written in pen and paper. Everything is there, exists in black and white. We know that gender justice is available to everybody in India, every married couple in India, irrespective of marriage existing under the Special Marriages Act, or the proper Hindu Marriage Act, or the Mohammedan laws, every couple in India has the right to gender equity when it comes to marital laws. Then where are we failing regarding implementation of gender justice in India? Firstly, ignorance and lack of education. Like I was mentioning earlier, there is still a part of society which refuses to accept the change, and which does not alter itself according to the changes in time. There, a certain amount of change in the very existence of the society along with time is needed, and it's normal, and the only constant thing in this world is change. So there is this ignorance. People have just shut their eyes and have refused to see the fact that yes, there are these laws, there are these organizations, and these are the problems that we are facing. And lack of education, like all the other complications that exist in a society, the root cause is always lack of education. Likewise, for the lack of the failure of administering gender justice in India, this is also a cause. Nextly, yes, the diversified personal laws, like I mentioned earlier, what is accepted right, the correct age to get married in one personal law is totally not acceptable in another personal law. So I we are a country which celebrates its diversity, and yes, a uniform civil code in India would somewhere quash the idea of diversity. But then the uniformity in the rights provided and the privileges enjoyed is a must. And to bring that uniformity, we must understand that personal laws in India have to undergo certain minor changes, not major changes, but certain minor changes. So, the variance in the impact of the abuse on victims, like I was stating earlier, a person who is in an urban part of India, she might uh, have more opportunities to reach out about speak up about her abuse or his abuse than that of rural India. Because while I was speaking about gram panchayats, I also spoke about the mentality that we Indians have, that it's their family dispute and we are nobody to interfere, or the lack of education clubbed with a rural uh, place of existence for a victim, that also plays a very key role in her voice or his voice of going unheard. Next thing is the preconceived notions. When we spoke about the misuse of 498A, and we spoke about the idea of mother being the better parent, the assumption that we have, these notions also somewhere have impacted on the gender justice being implemented in Indian marital laws. Then we have the great Indian concept of adjustment, because let us all face it. If you're running out of toothpaste, you cut the toothpaste end from one end and you pull out whatever is left over in the toothpaste tube, because adjustment. In India, we adjust. If you book a train ticket, if you get a ticket for one seat in train and there are three people sitting in your seat, it's okay because we Indians know to adjust. So this concept of adjustment, when implemented in a marriage is good to some extent, wherein the spouses, they have a mutual understanding, but not a man, not a woman, nobody should get adjusted to abuse, should get adjusted to violence, should get adjusted to harassment. Next, yes, of course, the social judgment, the eyes of the people. If at all I go tell people that I want divorce, if I go to court and ask for divorce and I call my husband abusive, will I be seen as a woman of a different character? Will I be given, the right amount of respect that I was being given as a married woman? That is a question that every lady will have before asking for divorce. And obviously, the men also will have those questions, because men who ask for divorce apparently become men who abandon their families, right? So these are the questions that societal judgments that people have to undergo before they speak out against some violence, right? And if a guy says that yes, my wife is mentally abusive, will he be considered less of a man? Society will obviously say, see, you are a guy who let let a woman abuse you, so what kind of a man are you? So these are the things that they start thinking. And obviously, like I repeatedly kept saying about article 21 and the right to privacy, till what extent can right to privacy be exercised? That again is something that we as Indians have ignored, and we have, somewhere accepted it the way it is going is right. Nextly, the implementational glitches in many laws, like we have the middlemen, we have corruption, and I would not like to dwell much upon all that, because it's apparent, we are seeing everything. So yes, the Domestic Violence Act of 2005 and other such laws, the implementational glitches that takes place, and what does the Domestic Violence Act, Domestic Violence Prevention Act has to say about men who are victims of such crime and all these things. And of course, we Indians again are very you know pros. We are very uh, good at blaming the victim. We say that you must have done something wrong, so that is why you have fallen victim to this offense. This again causes a fear in the victim's mind to approach the court of justice, to approach the NGOs and other organizations. Yes. So Kritika, can we have the next slide? What are the possible solutions? Let me quickly run down. One is that it's okay to talk to your relatives, friends, kins, or anybody if you are undergoing harassment, because in fear of societal judgment, that is not right, that you undergo harassment and live with the wrong person for the rest of your life. Then encourage open minded initiatives as a society. So when we all walk out of this Google Meets room, let us just pledge that we will not judge somebody who has come out who was victimized of harassment or anything as such, and we will not judge a divorced person, and we'll just accept that they gave it a try and it did not work out for them. Let us just make up our minds that we will not change the way we see somebody on their marital status, or let us make it a notion that we will go lend a helping hand to anybody who comes forward with certain issues in their marital life. Next is, yes, of course, the very celebrated case, the Smith versus Hugh judgment, wherein the court said that if there is an offense that is occurring inside a person's balcony, then the balcony is also a road for us. That means the law is ready to enter any nook and corner. If a man is hitting his wife, or if a woman is hitting her husband inside the house, law is ready to enter, break the barriers of Article 21 right there, and enter their house and say, yes, this is a violation of somebody's right. Then, yes, so we have the relation of the fact that realizing the fact that men can also be victims of domestic violence, men can also be victims of sexual harassment. Yes, we as a society should accept that. Then introduce moral sciences and gender justice subjects in school, so that the next generation who are coming out, who will venture into a marital life in few decades, let them understand what is right and what is wrong when they are children itself. That is a very good way, a very good approach that we can have. Encouraging mental health awareness. If somebody feels depressed and has complaints against their spouse, yes, it is okay to visit a psychiatrist, it is okay to visit self-help groups. They are not mad, they just have certain mental health related issues, and which have to be sorted. Next, stronger steps to eradicate poverty, unemployment, and illiteracy. Because, like I mentioned earlier, any problem that India is facing today is directly or indirectly related to these three things. So, as in much we eradicate these three nemesis of the Indian society, that much India will benefit, may it be in any situation. Nextly, reporting marital sexual harassments. You know, see, we have stayed under this notion that they are a married couple, and them having sex is okay. So, if the wife or the husband demands sex forcefully from the other spouse, it is okay because they're married. No, that is not the case. We must understand the severity of marital rapes, and we must understand that reporting of the same is the need of the hour, so that we can wake the legislature up and say that we need laws in this arena. We can wake the court up and say that we need judicial interpretation in this arena. With this, I conclude. So, yeah, finally, I'd like to stay at home and stay safe, take care of your health, and you have a nice evening.
Thank you so much, Aditi. That was really a wonderful session. Before winding up, let us please go through the comment section very quickly. So I have a question. When the concept of Gungat was started, and why there was such system? Am I audible?
Yeah, Kritika.
The question
So,
is about the Gungat system,
yeah.
and the participant is asking why it was started and why there is such a system.
Okay. So, when you take up any history book, right, and you look at Ravi Verma's paintings, you understand that the Gungat and Parda system did not exist at the very fag beginning of our culture. And like I mentioned earlier, when the women stop school in fear of stop attending in fear of a foreign invader laying their eyes on them, a criminal laying their eyes on them.
Your voice is lagging. Can you please come again? Your voice
Okay.
was lagging. Yeah.
Audible, Kritika?
Yes, yes. Now it is okay.
Okay. So I was saying that in all these times when women start, women were expected to bound themselves to the four walls of the house, and the fact that if you have seen the movie if you have heard about Rani Padmini, there are
Yeah.
instances wherein the violation of the rights of a woman forced her to cover herself up. that became a custom, and somebody else, other brother, husband, son, started the women to cover themselves up, and give rise to the of parda nashi Mohammedan society. The woman be to any outsider family and does not show her face. Father-in-law, brother-in-law, and such. So yeah, that is where it originated.
Okay, so we have one more question. Can a wife file a case against the girl who is having an extramarital affair with her husband? If yes, how? And what if the girl is unaware of the fact that the guy is married, and what steps a girl should take?
Kritika, I'm losing.
Yeah, okay, fine. I'll answer for the same thing. I'll answer for the same thing, no issues. No, the wife cannot. Yeah, no, the wife cannot file any case against the girl who is in relationship, who is in extramarital affair relationship with her husband. But indeed, she can file a complaint against her own husband, but she cannot file case against the other girl. And what if the girl is unaware of the fact that guy is married? See, what happens is that it is believed that you should be knowing about the guy when you enter into a relationship and other things. Yes, if you are unaware of the fact that he is married and he has hidden that fact from you, then you can obviously give a complaint against him, and you can initiate the criminal proceedings. That action you can take against him, that for the concealment of facts, for fraud, cheating, you can invoke all those grounds. Yeah, and thank you for all the positive reviews. Yes. How to establish mental harassment to husband? Yes, see, the definition of mental harassment is nowhere given. See, if the wife is eating 2 idlis and she asks for 1 more idli, in the same time, if the husband states that you cannot have so much idli, you eat so much idli, and he mocks at her, even that amounts to a kind of mental harassment. Okay, so mental harassment, it defines from case to case, from circumstances to circumstance, and from person to person. So as there is no general definition of the term mental harassment, it is up to the discretion of the court to consider and to entertain the particular incident as a mental harassment. Yeah, next question we have, we can report domestic violence or marital rape as an outsider, where can we report it? Yes, see, as an outsider, you can report it to the police station. Also, you can tell them that this is happening in that house, and as a spectator, you can go for it. And unfortunately, marital rape is not an offense in our country as of now. And you can bring this mental harassment under the grounds of cruelty or physical abuse. You can bring it under that, but the term marital rape is not an offense, and it is nowhere penalized, or this term marital rape is nowhere mentioned. But yes, you can go and give complaint for domestic violence. You can give complaint in some NGOs also, wherein you can tell that this is my neighbor, or this is what is happening. If you are a constant viewer of TV, then you might have seen there is a government ad which is from the Women and Child Healthcare Department, if I'm not wrong. In that, what happens is, like, if you find, they tell that, they convey a message that if you find any domestic violence happening in any of your neighborhood, go and just ring the bell. That signifies a notification or intimation to the other person that yes, somebody is watching. So you can do that. Yeah, thank you for the excellent. Yeah, all that goes to all the positive reviews of today's goes to Aditi. And yes, we have no more questions. Yes. Okay. What if the wife? Yeah, thank you everyone. What if the wife files a case against? What if the wife files a case against his husband under Section 377? How can he prove himself?
Kritika, again, 377.
It is it is no more there. 377 is unconstitutional. But yes, that is a ground for divorce if the husband is involved in bestiality. To the people who are from non-legal background, bestiality means indulging in sexual activities with some other person who is not a human, that is with some animals or unnatural sex. And yes, if the person is like, if person turns out to be, if the husband turns out to be a gay, which will in turn make him impotent, and she can file a case for divorce with him.
That again, adding on to what Kritika is saying, am I speaking to Aditi Verma? Okay, from one Aditi to another Aditi.
Yes.
Oh, that again comes under section 13 subclause 2 Aditi, wherein the wife has additional grounds like proving her husband impotent, like proving him interested in men and cannot beget a child from him is proof enough. And yet again, please understand that 377 IPC, it an offense. It is just something which is that you know they're into different kind of sexual pleasures, right? So 377, like again Kritika was mentioning, only portion of it wherein being gay removed from its category. So if a wife says her husband is gay, it is generally under section 13 subclause 2 of Hindu Marriage Act. Okay.
Yeah, and yes, does the Gender Equality Law 2011 apply to private household?
Of course it does. Like I mentioned, if Article 21, the right to privacy, has been breached by a law and something has been called a crime. Of course, the gender equality law does apply to a private household, but mind you, gender equality laws have nothing to do with your personal laws. And there is this concept of Latmar Holi in, uh, you know, in Bihar, wherein the wife has the right to go hit her husband on Holi. That is a custom. So you cannot say gender equality, the wife hit her husband like that, and it amounts to, domestic violence. But yeah, other which ways it is existing.
Yeah, and the last question for today is like, on whom does the proof of burden lies in the case of 377? Again, this is for the same section.
Yeah,
377.
like I mentioned, you can't allege somebody of being gay. You cannot allege somebody of their sexual orientation.
Orientation, yeah.
And the proof of burden in case of section 13 of clause 2 lies on the wife to prove that yes, my husband is interested in men and he is in a relationship with a guy, and or he has expressed that he is interested in men. The proof of burden lies on the wife because she is the alleger here. Provided the husband files for divorce saying that my wife is a lesbian, then proof of burden lies on him.
Yeah, okay. I think we are done with the question and answer session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being there. Thank you, Aditi, for sparing your time with us. Hope everyone had a great session. Thank you.
My pleasure, Kritika. So, bye everyone. Stay safe.